Well, welcome to episode 180 of 10-Minute Record Reviews. And this time I'm going to talk about War's album from 1972, The World's a Ghetto. And this is the original American pressing of this excellent record. In terms of the music, it's funky, it's Latin, it's black rock, whatever that is. It's basically unmistakably War, and I spent many, many years loving some of the music of War and trying to find other bands that sound like them. And really, there's nobody that really sounds like them, which is a shame because there ought to be, because they should have spawned a far bigger genre than they inhabit. Anyway, it's fantastic. So the band War comes together because of three different stories that all intersect around 1969. In 1962, the guitarist Howard Scott and the drummer Harold Brown formed a group called the Creators in Long Beach, California. In that early period, the Creators had a bit of a rotating lineup, but eventually saxophonist Charles Miller, bass player Morris B.B. Dickerson, and keyboard player Lonnie Jordan all joined the band. They were all talented players. They shared a variety of interests and influences across music, including pop, gospel, R&B, soul, and they began to make a name for themselves as a backing band and as a local bar band, basically in LA, but they got some pretty good gigs too. They would occasionally back up Ike and Tina when they would come to town, and they managed to accumulate enough backing to record a number of different singles, none of which went anywhere. The Creators suffered a bit of a body blow in 1966 when one of their co-founders, Howard Scott, the guitarist, was drafted into the Army, and he goes off for 2 years, and they basically go into hiatus. When Scott comes out of the Army in 1968, they reform under a different name this time, Night Shift, named after the fact that Harold Brown was working a job which required him to work nights. They continued to refine their funk and soul sound, and they had a whole bunch of recurring gigs with a bunch of different singers, including Deacon Jones, pro football star with the LA Rams, who had now turned to singing. The next part of the story has nothing to do with LA, at least not at this point, but goes back to Newcastle on Tyne in England in 1964 with the formation of the Animals, where Eric Burdon, Alan Price, and their colleagues formed one of the great first British invasion bands, which of course is well known for their cover of House of the Rising Sun. But eventually the band falls apart because of egos primarily. The band had originally been called Alan Price's Rhythm and Blues Combo. They then switched to the Animals. Alan Price wasn't keen on that. He wasn't keen on some of the songwriting credits not being attributed to him. Anyway, he buggers off, and actually you can see him almost immediately after he's left the Animals, just as a side note, in the D.A. Pennebaker documentary on Bob Dylan, Don't Look Back, where he's kind of looking lost and Dylan saying, "Why did you leave the Animals?" Which, anyway, Burdon, too, was a tough guy to be in a band with, and eventually his tempestuous nature, his increasing drug use, and his disillusionment with their sound led to the split. He started up his own psychedelic band, which he named, not particularly originally, Eric Burdon and the New Animals. They released a bunch of records. Not much happens. He gets bummed out. He tries to go into acting in LA. That's not really happening. And so 68, 69, he's getting back into singing and is just trying to find a foothold again after that big flurry of fame he'd had in the mid-60s. The third part of the story is all about a Danish kid called Lee Oskar, who's born in Copenhagen in 1948. His mom's a Holocaust survivor. He grows up, he's got a lot of musical talent, in particular on the harmonica. And at age 18, he decides there's no future for a harmonica player in Denmark, probably a reasonably astute observation, and heads off to the United States with really nothing more than a harmonica in his pocket. Nothing's happening for him eventually in New York. He goes to Toronto, he goes to San Francisco, and he ends up in Los Angeles. There, hustling for a break in the music scene, he ends up bumping into and befriending Eric Burdon, who of course is just coming out of his post-acting funk and is trying to find new collaborators. In 1969, Jerry Goldstein, who's a record producer in LA, hears the band Night Shift backing up Deacon Jones at this club called the Rag Doll in Hollywood, and thinks to himself, these guys are great, not so sure about Deacon Jones, but he knew that Eric Burdon was looking for a new gig and a new set of collaborators. So anyway, he invites Burdon, who brings along Lee Oskar, to come and jam with these guys. They do, it's an instant click, and both Burdon and Oskar add things that the guys in Night Shift can really appreciate. Burdon has this incredible stage presence, and Oskar, as we know now from War's catalog, has this remarkable sound and facility on harmonica. He can double basically as a vocal line, but he also is kind of like a one-man horn section, and so much of the work that he does is what's so distinctive about their records. So under Goldstein's management, they formed the group Eric Burdon and War, and trading off Burdon's fame, still lingering from the Animals, their first album is called Eric Burdon Declares War, and it includes the single Spill the Wine, which was recorded just as kind of an afterthought in the studio, but eventually becomes a #3 hit. They tour widely across the US and Europe in support of this record. There's a lot of buzz about the band because their performances Lots of interest. In September 1970, they're actually there with Jimi Hendrix as Jimi Hendrix's last ever stage performance when he gets up and jams with them at Ronnie Scott's on the 18th of September. He was to die the next day. They release a second album, actually a double LP, titled somewhat dubiously Black Man's Burden. But in touring to support that record, eventually Burden leaves the band during the middle of the tour. There's a variety of reasons, supposedly what has happened. You can read that he had an asthma attack. You can read that he had legal problems with his label and he didn't want to enmesh the other band members in his troubles. There's also a story that after Hendrix died, he went on TV while he was high and claimed it was a suicide, and the label got pissed off and threatened legal action. Anyway, who knows why he left. What was clear, however, was that War, who had originally been conceived by Goldstein just as a backing band for Burden, there was no real thought to them ever being a band in their own right, had progressed musically to such an extent that they were more than capable of carrying on the tour on their own and of recording their own records, which they duly did. This record, which came out in 1972, is their third recording just under their own name, and it's recorded at Crystal Industries Studios in LA. This is produced for the first time by two of the band members, Howard Scott and Lonnie Jordan, along with Goldstein. The lineup is a now settled post-Eric Burden lineup, and that includes Howard Scott on guitar, B.B. Dickerson on bass, Lee Oskar on a harmonica, Lonnie Jordan on organ, piano, and timbales, Harold Brown on drums, Papa D. Allen on conga and bongos, and Charles Miller on clarinet and three different kinds of saxophone. In addition, War, which is one of the great band collectives of all time, has everybody on vocals and everybody on percussion. It's recorded in a total of 29 days. On its release, it becomes their most successful album to date, and it's largely considered to be, artistically, their best record. One of the hit singles from this, the lead-off track, The Cisco Kid, goes gold, hits number 2, would have been number 1 except for Tony Orlando and Dawn's Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. Crucially, it also won them a substantial Latino following, which they cemented in later years with other Latin-flavored tracks like Low Rider. Side 1 starts with a Cisco Kid, which is just a beautiful piece of funk with a real Latin feel to it. What really stands out is the percussive excellence, which is so typical of this band in general. It's about the relationship between the Latino community and the Black community, essentially building bridges, and it was very popular as a consequence. Next song, Where Was You At, is an example of the key role played by Lee Oskar's harmonica in the sound of this band, not just in this record, but really throughout their discography. Lyrically, it's a bit of an odd song, and it has this funny little bridge kind of stuck at the end, so I don't know if you could have a bridge at the end, but anyway, it's at the end, about dogs and ponies, and then it feels after that they just decided to wind up the song like it's a series of unfinished thoughts. The largest part of side 1, however, is given over to the third and final track, which is City, Country, City. There's a whole bunch of pieces to this. There's a delicate little intro, and then it shifts gears, first to this kind of smooth soul beat with this gentle harmonica melody, and then to this really frantic shuffling funk, which really features Charles Miller's saxophone. Lots of percussive flavor, and Dickerson's bass shines all the way through. Side 2 starts with Four Cornered Room, which is an interesting song. It's not really a traditional blues in terms of its construct. It's more, I guess, a slow rock ballad as much as it is anything else. Lee Oskar's harmonica gives it a really genuine blues feel. It wouldn't be out of place on a Temptations record. And like some Temptations record, it has this extended spoken word intro. As a song, I find it occasionally threatens to become really interesting, but just kind of stops short. I don't know that it really is worth the 8.5 or 9 minutes that they devote to it. That's okay, because the next song, the title track, The World is a Ghetto, is a spectacular song, musically, lyrically, and emotionally. This is such a pleasing track to listen to for so many different reasons. Miller's sax is mournful and sultry. Dickerson's bass is just like butter. One more flourish to mention is Scott's guitar solo in the outro, which is just great. The final song is Beatles in the Bog, which is kind of a chant generally about love and about the sky and about Beatles. I think if drugs weren't the inspiration for this, they're probably necessary for full appreciation. For the most part, this is a very well executed and rarely equaled fusion of funk, rock, soul, Latin, and jazz. It's lyrically direct and fairly uncomplicated. The focus is squarely on the music and even more squarely on the groove. The consensus is this is their best album, and it's hard to deviate from that point of view, I think. Not everything works. There are some quirky things which don't quite land, but the playing is very solid. The musical instincts they have are absolutely right down the middle, and it holds your interest from start to finish. And for me, it's 4.5 out of 5 stars.